Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation about my findings in the ICLP project. So, my project assessed three themes of American nationalism: the melting pot, the frontier, and the American dream. But first, before I go over how my products actually analyzed these three themes, I first wanted to go over what these three themes actually meant, starting with the melting pot. So, the melting pot was an idea of assimilating multiple cultures. This is, for example, like if many people had the different cultures and ideologies and they all came into one place, they would be, all of those cultures would merge and become that one culture's place. And this was especially true in the pre to post World War eras, the pre to post World Wars era of America at the time, where several people who immigrated to America would come with their own values and beliefs, but then and cultures, but then they would assimilate into the American culture. In my cultural products, I found that the melting pot was seen as dangerous, as people can manipulate the system once they've assimilated into it. It also said that different ideologies may not coexist or assimilate in a perfect or peaceful manner. This often led to fights, riots, and murders. The American dream was the idea that if you work hard, good things would come to you, and this is a very common belief slash ideology, and it is still adopted by many human, not just Americans today. And it created an incentive to work for your dreams rather than just sitting back and letting them come to you. It was also a strategy that has been adopted, ideology that has been adopted by most Americans, and in the world, it's also been adopted by the world, and it's a major reason for success or failure. So if you didn't get into a school or an art school or a college, you should probably think, did I put enough effort into it? It's the main reason for success or failure. The frontier is a border that separates two ideologies or cultures. This can be physical or emotional. An example of this is the Berlin Wall, as it separates communism from democracy, and it also physically separated West and East Germany. It can also in my products it was described as a border that separated civilized to wild or east to west, and it was a deadly and dangerous place itself, where the people in the frontier were very coarse and rough. So the Virginian was the main work that criticized the frontier. The people shown on the frontier were shown as savages, where they often got into fights and they threatened to kill each other multiple times throughout the book. This is not related to the savageness of the frontier, but one quote said that they littered the frontier from the Columbia to the Rio Grande. This is talking about the settlements and showing how the frontier was a very vast and very crowded place, and it's a very populated place, and it basically set the framework for how those little villages and towns would then fight each other. Also, the narrator, who's tenderfoot, has to get used to the customs of the quote-unquote Wild West, as he figures out that it is nothing like the East or Wyoming. It's nothing like his culture in Wyoming, and he has to end up getting used to it, and he finds it harder than it actually. He finds out that it's harder than it actually is, than he thought it was. In Peter Pan, the pirates were able to build up dangerous plans to capture the Lost Boys, where the Lost Boys didn't really know what was going on, since there was a division between the two places, whereas the Lost Boys didn't know what the pirates were doing, the pirates didn't know what the Lost Boys were doing, and Captain Hook ended up concocting a plan to capture all the Lost Boys without the Lost Boys even knowing. So a Connecticut Yankee mainly criticized the melting pot. The main character ends up doing many questionable things throughout the book. The first thing he does is he distributes guns to the people in the old British 500, like the 500 British Kingdom, which basically creates a power struggle because guns would never be, or effective guns would never be a thing for a long time. And he ends up getting the monarchy and himself captured and sold as slaves. He also implements a new form of currency, which basically drains all the power from the civilians and gains and it gives the monarchy all the power when his thought was that it would grow the economy. Another thing was his ability to sway minds, as he had more knowledge of worldly and natural events, such as astronomy, and he uses this to fool people and gain advantages and win debates. In Peter Pan, there were certain groups in the movie, like the mermaids, the Lost Boys, and the pirates, and the Indians. So Captain Hook was able to take advantage of these groups and how they tried to coexist together. Where the Indians and the Lost Boys, they were very integrated and they knew each other's cultures really well. So Captain Hook was able to replicate these cultures where when the Indians won, they beat the Tom Tom, so he beat the Tom Tom himself. This was able to fool the Lost Boys and get them captured. Another thing that happened was Peter spreads the charisma, and he very much tries to incorporate Wendy to this new culture of her being the Lost Boy's mom. And he does this by teaching her how to fly, showing her what she'll do, building a house for her, a premature house for her. And he does all these things just to keep her away from her home and with him. While the melting pot and the frontier were criticized, the American dream was actually praised. In Cinderella, the stepmothers were shown in a negative light as they were not following the American dream. They were just lazy and ordered Cinderella to do all the work. So when the ball came and they thought that they would be married to the prince, they were all shunned away quite quickly. Cinderella, on the other hand, was a good example of the American dream as she worked hard every day to get what she wanted. There's one incident where the Cinderella tempts the fairy godmother and offers her a drink, and in return, the fairy godmother helps her with her collection of firewood. Another test was when she had the mental test of bringing rats to the fairy godmother, and previously in the movie, the stepmothers were shown to be very afraid of rats, while Cinderella eagerly brought them to the fairy godmother. Because of this, she gets a coach, servants, horses, and a gown to go to the ball. Finally, when she gets married to Prince Charles, the fairy godmother says, "The blessings of prosperity and happiness are always to be bestowed on the good or noble," which basically meant that if you work hard and you were honest about your work, then good things would come to you. That finishes my presentation. Thank you.